Hello, and welcome to our newest episode of the 25th Hour. I'm Cindy Tran.
And I'm Sadana Kwai. A lot of our team are still working online, but as you can see, most of us are back in person, and it's nice to be back in the studio.
Absolutely, and it's the first time that hosts don't have to wear masks in 2 years. But in case you're wondering, our crew are still wearing masks because that's just the time that we're in. And it's difficult to predict where we're going to be with the pandemic restrictions.
One thing we can safely say, though, is that as the weather gets nicer, a lot of us will be making our way back outdoors. And this brings us to the theme of our episode and of Earth Day 2022, investing in our planet. We sent our doc teams out to find stories of people making investments through their businesses, homes, and their own time.
Our journalists came back with stories close to them, and each doc here today began with journalists' desire to learn more about climate crisis issues. So our first doc looks at changing how we deal with something we all use, plastic. And this story was produced by your team, wasn't it, Sadana?
Yes, we wanted to investigate how recycling plastic is not always as easy as throwing it out in a bin. A lot of times, plastic waste doesn't get disposed of properly and ends up in landfills. On top of that, some plastics can't be recycled at all. My family and I try to avoid contributing to the buildup of plastic waste as much as possible, but I learned that there are problematic plastics that make this process more complex than it seems. I live in a house with 6 other people, and in an attempt to be eco-conscious, we take out recycling about 2 times a week. But with this many people in the house, it's clear how fast this plastic adds up. This got me wondering, am I doing this properly? Turns out it's not as simple as it seems. Not all plastic can be recycled. Sometimes the plastic itself still has product left over in it, or if the product is small, think less than 3 inches, it doesn't even make it through the sifting process. So even though I can wash something like this out and throw it in the recycle bin, I might as well just throw these in the garbage. This is what we call the linear economy. In this type of economy, raw materials are used to make a product, and once that product is done, it gets tossed out. It has no way of being recycled or reworked back into the economy. So a shift to a more sustainable system means that we move from a linear economy to a circular one. This means that from the start, products are made with an aim to make them reusable and recyclable. So when a product is done, the plastic packaging gets recycled, and this way it takes away the need to make new products. Now, this sounds good in theory, but not all plastics can be recycled. This brings us to the problematic plastics. Problematic plastics refers to items that cannot be easily recycled. This includes plastics that are poor quality, plastics that can be replaced with other more sustainable materials, contaminated plastics, and then there is all these small plastics that get tossed out during the sifting process. With this many problematic plastics around, it got me thinking of how we even got here. Is there a future where plastic could be eliminated? To find out more, I spoke to Kevin Brady. He's the Director of Sustainability Services at engineering and construction management company, Asinco. So Professor Brady, thank you for sitting down with me today.
You're welcome. Happy to be here.
Thank you. So can you tell me a little bit about why has plastic become such a common material that's used in production design?
A lot of reasons. The different types of resins can be applied to all kinds of different products. It can be used in almost every sector of the economy, and it can be produced at low cost.
Like if it has all these benefits, what's the catch with plastic?
They get dispersed everywhere. Many times the material doesn't even make it into a recycling system. It's thrown out and they accumulate, and it's causing a lot of problems for ecosystems. The photos and pictures of the oceans and rivers and beaches that are littered with plastics they're horrific. Plastics has a problem. The industry really needs to be policing itself more and trying to figure out these issues.
Is there space or is there a role for plastic in the future?
In terms of what the future looks like, it's a zero waste society as much as we can, right? And in that zero waste world, we have a more circular economy. So Materials that are being produced and going out into society are being reused over and over again. And the plastics industry has to figure out how it's going to live in that world, or it's going to get designed out of that world.
This still got me thinking about recycling my shampoo bottle. Is there any way to make this process sustainable? Maybe there's a way to do away with plastic packaged shampoo altogether and use something else. I was happy to see that this is being done. One of the companies is called Earth Suds. I wanted to learn more about the people who made the product and what their goal was. To do this, I spoke to Marissa Viteretti, one of the company's co-founders.
I'm Marissa Viteretti, and I'm the co-founder and head of product for Earth Suds.
Okay, so what motivated you to make a zero-waste product?
I've always been very sustainability focused. I care a lot about the impact that we as humans leave on the planet. And I think that there's always better ways to be doing things in terms of something sustainability wise. I think that in general, the best businesses, you are running the most profitably when you're running the most sustainably.
What sort of impact has Earth Suds had on sustainability?
So since starting, we've been able to prevent over 17,000 plastic bottles from being created. And because plastic uses resources to create it, such as water, oil, and CO2, by effect, we've also reduced the use of those resources. So about 17,000 bottles would equate to over 23,000 liters of water, over 300 liters of oil, and over 3,000 pounds of CO2. Since we have started, there's been a lot more, ideas that have come out that are similar to us. And that's great in terms of like the amount of products that we can have on the market for different options of sustainable versions of shampoo, because that just means that every consumer can find a more sustainable option that works for them.
The shift to a circular economy model for plastics requires everyone to be on the same page. Companies like Marissa's are showing what people can do to eliminate plastic waste. And until manufacturers claim responsibility for their products as end-of-life management, I can do my part too by ensuring I recycle correctly.
Well, Sudanna, you really showed us that there are so many layers when it comes to dealing with the problem of plastic. But I'm curious, what do you want to see when it comes to the world's approach of plastic production?
You know, I think it could be really helpful to see governments take on that leadership role and prove that this issue is worth taking seriously. And then the other thing is for all of us to know when we need to use new products and when we don't, which brings us to our next story.
One industry that has been investing in more sustainable practices is construction. But I know that when I think about how they are making their industry more eco-friendly, I assume that it is with cutting-edge materials that are specially engineered. It turns out that preserving old buildings may be a better choice for the environment than replacing them with our new ones. Our journalist Jonathan Gott explores this further for us.
This is what I do twice a year. I put a magazine together for the Architectural Conservancy of Ontario. See? That's me. Well, me from a couple of years ago anyways. This season's issue is on heritage and sustainability. And I learned that old buildings can be more environmentally friendly than new ones. Nearly 30% of Canada's landfill waste comes from construction and demolition. The Leslie Street Spit landfill in Lake Ontario is a good example of that. I also learned how preserving an old fire station in Ottawa saved 185 tons of CO2, and how an architecture professor rebuilt a 19th century cottage with energy-saving retrofits in Prince Edward County. I found that newer isn't always better, and sometimes older methods perform just as well as new ones. The Leslie Street Spit landfill in Toronto began in the 1950s. It was part of the city's plan to increase the outer harbor's capacity, but the plans were never realized. So, decades of construction waste piled up on the shores, and the spit is now a leisure trail, called the Tommy Thompson Park. The landfill is still growing, largely because owners have the automatic right to demolish buildings. Until we end the right to demolition, we're going to see construction materials go to waste. Some heritage architects say that municipalities can fix this by assessing whether a building has potential for reuse before actually issuing a demolition permit. But many building owners are already choosing to repurpose their heritage properties. It's not like old buildings are useless. This is Ottawa's Parkdale Fire Station. After being decommissioned in 1986, it was repurposed into commercial rental property. The Athena Sustainable Materials Institute here in Ottawa did the math. They figured that keeping the old building instead of building a new one saved about 185 tons of CO2 over 60 years, which is the regular lifespan of a building. That's equivalent to the electricity consumption of 85 homes for a whole year. I'm going to meet Jonah Bond, the property manager, and he's going to tell me about how old buildings can still be useful today.
The most amazing thing about this building is really that it's not just a showpiece, it's actually very usable. It's seen many uses over the years, from massage therapy parlor to an event gathering space to pure office space. Once the renovation is complete, the Better Business Bureau will be using this as one of their Ottawa and Eastern Ontario offices. I believe the ground floor will be a space for social gathering, events, some collaborative working, and the second floor will be more traditional office space.
Preserving the structure of an existing building stops material from ending up in the landfill, but upgrading it with energy-saving retrofits is a good way to cut even more emissions. After all, 12% of Canada's carbon emissions come from building operations. To find out how it's done, I'm going to Consicon in Prince Edward County, about an hour east of Toronto. Griffin Cottage behind me used to stand in Ancaster, just outside Hamilton, but it was moved here in 2010 to save it from redevelopment, and the owner rebuilt it with green retrofits. I'm going to meet her to find out more.
Hi there.
Hi Shannon, so nice to see you.
Great to see you too. Shall we go to the porch?
Yes, that's a wonderful idea.
Okay, let's go. The common misunderstanding is that old wooden windows are no good, and that's because they are leaky. Well, my average for hydro and heating, a house this size, is $250 a month. Those windows will be good for another 200 years. When you come across an old house, if you can somehow renovate it, or if you have to take it apart and rebuild it, the wood that you use, the materials you use, are going to be so much better than the ones that you can buy now. It's going to be old wood. So what used to happen is trees would grow and they'd have a very hard time, getting enough water, getting enough light. So the fibers are really close together. You could find all the material in this house 200 years later is still dimensionally stable.
Modern vinyl windows, by comparison, only last about 40 years, which makes a strong environmental and economic case for preserving heritage buildings. So, newer buildings aren't always more climate friendly than old ones. And while we can retrofit them with new materials, there's also value in learning from older building techniques. Taking the best from the new and the old can reduce our carbon impact.
I think this is such an interesting story because how often do we hear that older is actually better?
It's true. I feel like this story really shows that people used to make things to last, but somewhere along the way we stopped doing that. And it's good to see that we are starting to swing back the other way. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we'll find out why some tenants in Ottawa have had to come up with their own solutions for composting.
So far, we've seen stories about how people are making investments in recyclable materials as a way to prevent pollution and overproduction. Now, we're going to meet some people who are trying to invest their time and energy into composting, but are finding it more difficult than it could be. Cindy, this next story was produced by your team, correct?
Yeah, so this story actually began when we noticed that there was a gap in Ottawa's initiative to bring green bins in, and they were falling short in just a few ways. So composting with the green bin has helped reduce landfill waste, but we found that apartment buildings haven't all been included in the city's composting program. What this means is that a significant number of people in Ottawa simply can't access green bins. Our journalist Zach Delaney set out to find people looking for solutions.
Everyone knows the blue bin, the black bin, and since 2010, Ottawa residents have known the green bin, a handy little container for organic waste like food scraps. But for multi-residential buildings, like my apartment near Alta Vista, residents are stranded, having to throw scraps like these into the landfill. That's because multi-residential buildings in Ottawa have to opt into the green bin program, though the City of Ottawa says that only 43% of buildings have done so. And if I'm struggling with my food waste, what about my neighbors? I spoke to Grace in Casa about her situation.
Maybe 2 years ago, so I sent them an email to the property manager to ask if this was something that they'd considered, because I saw on the city website that the green bin program is something that the city offers, and I think not even that expensively to buildings. So I emailed them and they got back to me saying that they had actually explored the issue, but that there was no room and it was just not feasible. They didn't give me many more details other than that there was no space in the garbage facility we already have.
The City of Ottawa is on its way to implementing a green bin system for multi-residential buildings. But how does the City of Ottawa compare to other urban centres in Canada? I sat down with Duncan Berry, who's worked extensively with the City of Ottawa on helping them increase their waste diversion plan.
This is not a challenge unique to Ottawa. All municipalities have this in varying degrees. I guess what's different is the degree to which they've really worked hard to make it work and provide the service. And Ottawa still has some catching up to do. So I think we're probably behind. We're behind on a lot of this, frankly. I mean, our waste diversion rates across the board are not what they should be.
According to Duncan Berry, Ottawa only has a 16% diversion rate in multi-residential buildings. That includes organics and recycling. Collectively, both multi-residential and curbside pickup is about 44%. Other leading municipalities in Ontario, like Toronto, are doing around 65% diversion rate. That's a 20 percentage point difference between what Ottawa is doing versus what a place like the region of York does, which is more than 80%. Even though there's no official city program for apartment green bins yet, people can still do their part by being a little bit creative. Grace in Casa descends 20 floors to bring her compost to a nearby apartment building that does have a green bin.
There's 3 or 4 sites I know that have compost bins that are public. So what I usually do is I cross the street and I check the building that's in front of our building. And if for some reason there are no garbage bins that are outside, I'll come to this one. So today I came to this second site, and as you can see, there's garbage bins here. And the worst case scenario, when there's absolutely nothing, I'll go actually to Lyon Street. And if we walk down a couple blocks to the south, there's usually just one lone green bin on the side of the street that's used for dog poop. So I'll just throw that in there. So that's usually how I go about this.
So I asked Grace what the ideal solution looked like for her.
Oh, that's easy. Just having composting bins just underneath in our normal garbage space would be perfect, because I think most people go there to throw out big garbage items or recycling anyway. So just to have another bin in that space, I think would really motivate people who would not otherwise make the small trek that I did to throw out things in another building.
The City of Ottawa is developing a multi-residential waste diversion strategy because there's currently no rule in place that says that multi-residential buildings need to have a green bin or even a recycling bin. In 2020, the city collected 65,399 tons. Approximately 16% of this waste was diverted through recycling and green bin programs. City waste audits show that 58% of waste in the garbage could have been diverted through recycling and green bin programs. With the new strategy, they hope to increase recycling and green bin participation at multi-residential properties. So hopefully, in the near future, Grace and I won't have to worry about our eggshells.
It's a good feeling to know that there are people like Grace who go out of their way to make eco-conscious decisions, and especially when their living situations make it a challenge to.
And I know many of the viewers might be living in buildings without compost systems as well. Hopefully this has shown that there are temporary solutions that can make a difference while we deal with the larger problems around waste management.
Of course, and that's exactly the message we'll be hearing from our final story of the day.
25th Hour reporter Tala Mutari has been thinking about planting a pollinator-friendly garden. She spoke with a farm owner and a biologist to get a better understanding of why this might be a good idea and to learn what kinds of plants she should be thinking about including. She learned that her small project is doable and can make a big difference if enough people join her.
The core of my spirituality lies with having a respectful relationship with Mother Earth. This includes taking care of her, nurturing her, and the environment and all the living beings that are on her. That's why I chose to be a vegetarian. That's why I choose to invest in the environment. And that's why today I'm here to talk to Emily Rosema, the owner and founder of Mingle Health Farms, which I'm here in right now, to tell us about planting a pollinator-friendly garden to support pollinators that are endangered. Let's see where this journey takes us.
So the bottom section we've planted with native herbs. And since that, we've just been doing more and more research on native species that are in this area and how beneficial they are.
Planting a pollinator-friendly garden is beneficial to the larger ecosystem because it attracts pollinators, provides them with food, provides them with habitat, and they also help grow our crops. But aside from planting native plants, my conversation with Emily has taught me the importance of also planting companion flowers. Companion flowers are a type of plant that attracts pests and insects away from the plants that are good for pollinators. You can spot them by their bright colors and their strong scents. We plant these so that Mother Nature can balance itself out without the use of chemicals and pesticides, which usually end up in our water and kill our pollinators. I'm still wondering though, what is the science behind planting native plants? So I'm talking to Ryan Norris, a biologist from the University of Guelph.
The coevolution there is obviously between native plants and native insects. When you introduce a non-native plant, for example, into a landscape, it can create a whole bunch of potentially dangerous situations.
When you plant a non-native crop, native wildlife like insects, pollinators, may end up liking that new crop more than the native crops, which makes it invasive as it takes up more habitat instead of the native crops. And how do we usually deal with invasive species? That's right, through chemicals, and we don't want to do that. That's why we want to ask the question, how will individual investment make a difference? Or even will they make a difference?
So I think individual investments are good. But they need to be widely adopted to make a difference.
In order for this type of investment to work, we need to plant flowers in as many lawns as possible. Canada has around 6.2 million lawns. If we convert just 1/4 of each lawn, we would have around 14,400 hectares of pollinator habitat. That would have a huge impact on the environment. But you know, lawns aren't the only spaces that could be pollinator friendly. Emily has done this on a larger scale in her farm. And this is what she had to say on the impact she witnessed on wildlife.
We do have the carpenter bees, and then we had a hummingbird moth last year, which was fantastic to see. It's a beautiful, beautiful bug. But we do see lots of beneficial bugs, and the more years you go organic, the more it naturally balances itself out. So you get your beneficial bugs attacking your problematic bugs.
It will cost me $35 to plant my pollinator-friendly garden. This includes seeds, seed trays, and the soil. I'm taking Emily's advice and planting some yarrow and columbine. They are fast-spreading, colorful, and low maintenance, and they handle the Canadian climate really well. Now that I have a clear plan to help the environment and support it, all I need is to take the action. I know I will, but will you?
So Cindy, are you going to be trying to plant your own pollinator garden?
I mean, it's definitely something I want to try, especially with summer just around the corner. I'm not much of a green thumb myself, but anything to help the pollinators.
I like your optimism. I think people in our generation have become overwhelmed with the idea of the looming climate crisis. And these stories show that it's not a losing battle, and working towards a better future is not hopeless. Governments, businesses, and individuals can all do their part.
I know what you mean, and with the way we hear about climate change in the media, it feels like there's nothing we can do. Right now, I'm actually feeling the opposite way. I have a bunch of ideas for how I can do my part, and it feels good to believe that my own efforts are worth it.
Me too. I'll be adding a green bin to deal with my food waste properly because these everyday practices really do make a difference.
And I'm actually going to take more time to sort through my plastics before I recycle them and challenge myself to think about which plastics I really do need.
That's it for our episode of the 25th Hour. Our team will be back in the fall with more stories.
Until then, I'm Cindy Tran.
I'm Sedana Kwai.
Thanks for watching.